Oh, yeah.
Subscribe to StevensvilleGamers, my dudes.
I like game design a lot. Just the act of sort of crafting games, balancing them, making flavor meet function, just making games that people want to play. Whether that is a tabletop game that you play one time with a few friends, whether that's a card game, whether that's a video game, or a mod for a video game, I really like making games. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about that. This is the first episode in what I hope will be a series about game design and about just sort of how to design games, the different things you want to know. So a lot of the wisdom that I have over the sort of over the course of learning about game design comes from Mark Rosewater, the lead designer for Magic the Gathering. I listen to a lot of podcasts about it. I'm a frequent user of the r/game design subreddit. I've designed some homebrew tabletop games that I've played with friends. And I just want to sort of share what I've learned over time with other people and just build up a sort of community pool of game design knowledge. So I hope you guys enjoy this, and I hope to be making another episode next week if this one does well. So, this one's about replay value. Now, what is replay value? Replay value is the non-quantifiable measure that makes a player more likely to want to play your game again. Now, it can be created artificially by giving your player access to newer, unique game pieces or skills on subsequent playthroughs, but it's most effective to learn how to create it organically. And today we're going to discuss ways to create replay value in-game organically. Replay value is important because, the more times your player plays your game, the more they're enjoying it. The more the more time they're getting out of playing your game, the more invested they are in your game. And player investment, when it's not being done cynically through stuff like the sunk cost fallacy to convince players to keep grinding, when player investment is organic and something that gives the player something, it's very good. It's something that a game should shoot for. So that's what replay value is. The first thing that is intrinsic or that's key to understanding replay value is that choices are everything. How many choices is your game making your player make? There is such thing as too many choices. You don't want them to get burnt out. But there are games where your player makes zero choices other than maybe how to tackle a specific course, stuff like Super Monkey Ball. And that game, I would say, has very low replay value because your player isn't making meaningful choices that are going to make one playthrough very different from another. And as you can see, I've put two Pokemon themes up here because Pokemon is very good at making their player make choices. Your playthrough is going to be very different depending on what your team looks like, and your team is going to very easily be very different from game to game. How meaningful are these choices? How much do these choices change a game versus change one playthrough from another? For example, you can have dialogue options where an NPC asks you if you like their hat. And if you say yes, they're like, oh, thank you, and then they continue with their dialogue as it would have been. And if you say no, they're like, oh, scandalous, and then continue with their dialogue as it would have been. This, I wouldn't say, really counts as a choice for the purpose of adding replay value, because it doesn't change the way that the game plays out after that. How will these choices make one playthrough differ from another? That sort of ties into the last one. If I make this choice, and it's mutually exclusive from another choice, I'm going to want to go back and play the game again and make the other choice and see how differently the game would have played out. How clear is it that these choices are meaningful? Sometimes your players will feel burned if a choice that they didn't realize was important was really important. There's a scene in Paper Mario, The Thousand Year Door, where you're told not to read someone's diary, and that there will be a big consequence if you do. And I thought it was a secret boss fight or something, so I read the diary, and the game kept warning me, are you sure you want to, are you sure you want to? And when I read the diary, it just killed my character and gave me a game over. That choice, it was not made clear how meaningful it was to the game. I was led to believe that it was something else. And so that was just kind of frustrating for me as a player. And on the opposite end, there are some games that make choices out to be very important and then they actually aren't. Fire Emblem Awakening is guilty of this, where there will be incredibly important story beats, but the same thing will end up happening. You won't recruit any different characters, you won't do any different maps, regardless of what choice you make. Emran's Sacrifice is an example, Lucinia's Judgment. Look up these scenes on YouTube. It's kind of crazy how the game just doesn't change, despite completely different things happening at these story beats. And then the last thing you want to watch out for is one of these choices more fun, whereas the other will improve their characters / game pieces. If I'm upgrading my character on a skill tree, and I can get a new attack with a new animation that's really neat, or I can get an important stat boost, and it's clear that the best thing to do to continue with the game is get the important stat boost, but the thing I really want to do is get this new move and try it out on some enemies, I'm going to feel bad either way. I'm either going to pick the cool new skill and feel like I'm playing suboptimally, and so the game isn't going to be as fun for me in that respect, or I'm going to pick the stat boost, and I'm not going to have access to this fun new tool that I was excited to play with. So the game isn't going to feel as fun in that respect. So you want to make sure that your choices aren't going to make your player feel like they're really, really missing the other thing, even if, to give your game a challenge, it necessitates them actually functionally missing the other option. So this is why choices are so important, and that's one of the things you really have to ask yourself. Is one of these choices more fun, whereas the other will improve their characters / game pieces? Another thing I want to point out is that choices pull your player's attention to your game. Even the best games have lulls. Any game will have its players mentally check out from time to time while playing it. This can actually act to prevent burnout. But your players should be invested in choices. When they're asked to make a meaningful choice between two mutually exclusive options, the examples I give here are upgrading their character in a skill tree, or using their resources for a turn to play a card in a card game, this choice should yank them back into perspective, forcing them to use more of their mental processing power to make this decision. If it doesn't, your player isn't taking your game seriously, and that's not always a bad thing, but players' mental and emotional investment in your game is important to their enjoyment of it. So, picture a card game that you're playing. You have to decide how you're going to use your mana, or your summon, or whatever your resources for your turn. And you have to do that. You can't just sort of passively drop cards. You have to be thinking about what they're going to do. So it pulls you from that lulled, like, just sort of passively grinding, not really thinking about it mindset into, oh, this decision will affect the rest of the game, and if I make it right, I get to feel smart, you know? So this game is making me feel smart, like that kind of thing. It pulls your player, snaps them back into really thinking about the game. So choices are really important, and here I've put the level up screen from Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. You know, you can play this game pretty mindlessly, just sort of almost like a rhythm game, getting all the jumps right and just going through the battles. But when you level up, you do have to think about it. My girlfriend and I were playing through this game recently, and we would open it up. Whenever we would level up, we would both like look at the screen and we would argue about. I would always say we want badge points, and she would always say we want heart points or flower points. Sometimes she would agree with me on badge points because badge points are important. But the point is, you would you get pulled from just passively playing the game into actively playing the game when these kinds of screens come up, when important choices have to be made, and that's good. That gets your player invested in your game. If they feel pressured to make every decision as though it's going to control whether they enjoy the rest of their playthrough, then the game will be more stressful than it is fun. So including a safety net, like a way to go back on these decisions, can be helpful, but not strictly necessary. So now I want to talk about replay value versus completion potential. A lot of people think these are mutually exclusive. They're not exactly, but they can tend to push against one another. So games which prioritize replay value will often have the player make decisions which are meaningful and irreversible. This will increase the urge to play the game again, making different decisions, but decrease the player's attachment to each individual playthrough or game. Card games do this especially. Obviously, a card game is very quick. It's very different every time, and you want to play another one right after usually. The example I've used here is the Elder Scrolls Morrowind. That old meme with this character's death, the thread of prophecy is severed. You can do things in that game that just completely ruin your playthrough, and you can continue on in that ruined playthrough. which has some value to it. The idea that you can do that, that they've made all these different scenarios where that happens. Like, it takes a lot of care to design a game that way. But if your playthrough can just become a sandbox with like a messed up world where this important character is dead, then you're going to get less attached to each consecutive playthrough. But, you know, you're going to make a lot of save states to try out these different decisions. So, you know, that is player investment. And then games which prioritize completion potential will make player decisions low stakes and collectibles not mutually exclusive from one another. This gives players who are driven to complete things an incentive to collect everything, but can have the side effect of making players check out of decision making if they trust that everything can be taken back. Platformers do this especially often. If I'm being asked to make a decision between my micro progression through this level, and my macro progression through the game, but I know that I can just replay this level later, this collectible will still be here, if I go after this collectible, I can still go after this collectible, the decision doesn't feel as meaningful, so it doesn't even really feel like a decision. But some people just really like completing games. I've got here the Diddy's Conquest 102% complete screen. People like to collect all the objects. You know, this game has 1,000 beans scattered throughout the platform. I have to collect all the beans and all 12 of the pairs of headphones. That appeals to a lot of people. That speaks to a lot of people. But those things aren't mutually exclusive, that replay value versus completion potential. So let's talk about a couple ways where you can have both. You can sort of have your cake and eat it too. So making permanent decisions feel like they aren't just taking away something from your player, just giving them different options from another playthrough. And a game I want to highlight here is Fire Emblem Awakening. For all my problems that I have with it, the system of pairing up your characters in the first round to have second generation characters. So it's a tactical RPG, and your characters get married on the battlefield. Basically, they fall in love on the battlefield, and then it's got this time travel component to the story where their kids come back in time from the future to help you fight the bad guy. And each character, the character is determined by who their mother is, but their hair color and some of the classes that they have access to and their stats are determined by their father. So in one playthrough, this Inigo character, he might have one dad who was a mage, and so he has access to some more magic classes and more magic-oriented stats, and like the skills he has access to are changed. And then in the next playthrough, he might be playthrough, he might be different. He might be like a berserker type, stat-wise, and in terms of what classes he has access to. And the thing is, like, yes, on one playthrough, Inigo might be worse than another one, but you can still recruit him in every playthrough as long as one of his parents doesn't get killed. So the fact that you can sort of change, you can change the way these meaningful decisions are made without really taking away the meaningful decision or making someone feel like they've been screwed out of an option. You can still complete the game regardless of whether you made bad pair-ups in the first generation and made a bunch of kids that are mixed between physical and magical attacking or whatever pitfalls, or made it so that a character could have gotten a really strong skill but instead it went to no one because it went to a kid that can't use it or something. The point is that you can still complete the game even if you've made suboptimal decisions in that case. So that's one way to do it. And then the other way to do it that I really like is making decisions permanent for the main story, but allowing the player to explore the options they left behind at a later point. So the example I've got here is Mario Odyssey. There are worlds that it lets you tackle in any order. Like right here, it's letting you choose between the Lake Kingdom and the Wooded Kingdom, and you can't go on until you've beaten the kingdom that you chose right there. And then you do another kingdom, and then you do the one that you didn't choose. So it sort of gives a sense of individuality to your playthrough and allows you to choose to make a meaningful decision there in the short term, but in the long term you're still going to get to go to all the kingdoms. You're not going to miss out on any collectibles, you're not going to miss out on any play experiences because you're still going to go to each kingdom in your playthrough. Some RPGs do that where after you've fought a boss you can't fight them again until you have beaten the game. So, like, I chose not to do this dungeon on my main playthrough, so I don't have any of the gear for now while I'm fighting through the game. But when I get to the end of my playthrough, I can go back and do all the dungeons that I skipped. So I'm not like my playthrough is going to be different from someone else's. But at the end of the game, if I want to collect every single item or weapon or skill for my characters, I still can. So that's a common thing in RPGs, and these are both really good ways to reconcile replay value with completion potential. A playthrough is going to be different enough from another one, and clearly different enough from another one, that someone who just likes to play through games is going to want to play through your game multiple times. But it's enough decisions are reversible and enough things are collectible that someone who just likes to complete games is going to want to complete your game. Their save file is going to be important to them. So we're going to go through a few ways to add meaningful choices that are pretty easy for game developers that are game designers that are pretty easy to find a good foothold in. So one is skill trees. The one I've got right here is Spider-Man for PS4, a game I've never played. But essentially just you get a limited number of skill points as you level up. So you're not going to actually be able to learn all of these skills. They are mutually exclusive to a degree. But you have a lot of options each level up, and each option that you choose is going to unlock more options later. So you can choose what kind of gameplay style you like best and move into that gameplay style as you level up and as you learn new skills. So maybe on this playthrough, I'm really liking the gameplay of swinging around on webs from the top of buildings. I'm going to upgrade my web slinger abilities really quickly, and maybe not neglect, but at least not focus on innovator or defender like the other skill trees. But then in the next playthrough, like when I'm done with the game and I start another playthrough, I might want to pick a different focus for my skills that I'm learning. And so that's going to incentivize me to start another playthrough, because if the game just picks all of my skills for me as I level up, and I don't get any choice, and it's not even random, it's just the same each time, I'm not going to have as much fun in terms of playing the game a second time, because there's not going to be a different build for me to try out. So skill trees are relatively easy. You'll have to design much more skills per character, and you'll have to decide how to balance them. You obviously can't put the strongest skill for one tree at the base and the strongest skill for another tree at at the end of one of the branches. You have to stack them so that players who invest in one tree or one branch are getting what they need out of it. But skill trees are a really fun way to do that. It requires a little bit more balance. So the next way is route splits. Now Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones does this. Fire Emblem Three Houses does this. There's quite a few games that do route splits. Octopath Traveler is one big route split. But essentially just when you get to a certain point in the game, you make a choice that will dictate the rest of the game or a large portion of the game in terms of what content you experience. So like here I'll use Sacred Stones as the example. Ephraim and Erica, the two lords, you follow one of them. When you're done with the tutorial chapters, you choose one of them to follow for about the next third of the game. And it doesn't change what stuff you have access to at the end, because all of the characters that the other one gets to recruit will join your army when you meet back up with the other lord. But it changes the chapters you have access to. There's about, I think, 8 to 10 chapters in the route split that will be completely different if you chose Ephraim and completely different if you chose Erica. So you'll want to play the game a second time because you want to see what the other route is like. You'll hear about their adventures when you meet back up with them. And it's just a neat way to do it. You're not depriving the player of anything materially if they like to complete the game, because you're still going to get all the characters and most of the items that you would on the other route. But in terms of gameplay experience, you are restricting the gameplay experience so that they're going to want to play it again to get the other half of the gameplay experience. My only caution with this is don't lock routes behind a paywall. There are some games that do that. Fire Emblem Fates is a terrible game that does that. If they're added as DLC later, that's cool, but you generally don't want to tell players, like, oh, you have a choice here. These other ones all cost money, but you can do this route, because then, paywalls don't feel good. But route splits are a great way to add meaningful choices, add mutually exclusive choices, and keep your players happy and give them some replay value. And then the other one is quick playthroughs. So here I've listed Pikmin 1 and The Binding of Isaac. Roguelikes are automatically going to fall into this. Their whole appeal is that you can play them many times, and it's going to be completely different each time. You can play them in like an hour. and still win. So Binding of Isaac is a stand-in for all roguelikes. But essentially, if you can play through a game really quickly, and your choices felt a little meaningful, then you can add some replay value. But the other thing is, even if your choices weren't super meaningful, like in Pikmin 1 is pretty linear. There's not a lot of, like, you can do the areas in different orders, but you're playing the same game every time. But if it only takes about 3.5 to 6 hours to beat Pikmin, probably like 6 hours if it's your first time, you might want to immediately play again just to see if you can do it while losing less Pikmin, or do it while making more Pikmin, or do it quicker, do it in a shorter time limit, since the game keeps track of all these things. So if a game has quick playthroughs, and every time you beat it you feel like, oh, well, man, next time I think I could do it a little better, then that is going to add replay value in and of itself, because you're going to replay the game if you think that you can do it better next time. And the Binding of Isaac is a roguelike, so of course the dungeons are all procedurally generated, so it's going to be a completely different experience each time. And that's where the replay value comes from. It's very random. The games are quick. You can die and just lose your file. The game sort of teaches you very quickly not to get attached to a specific playthrough, because your next playthrough is going to be starting from scratch, basically. So that's a way to add replay value. And the last thing that I really want to touch on in this game design talk is give your players stories to tell. If your game is the same every time or lacks meaningful gameplay decisions, players aren't going to have a lot to talk about with each other. After all, they just play the same exact game. But you'll find that the more diverse your gameplay experiences, the more your players will have to discuss and share with one another. If I finish your game and have a story to tell my friend about something that almost definitely didn't happen in their playthrough, then not only am I emotionally invested in the game, but my friend might play it again and try to explore the route I took and have a similar encounter. So the example is like for people who played Skyrim, which should probably be everyone at this point. You get a companion. You can have someone follow you, and deep in dungeons, there will be interesting dialogue options that are triggered with specific companions. Maybe your companion dies and you have to get a new one, or go alone. Maybe you get a dog that helps you fight alongside you and your companion. But essentially, your playthrough is going to be very different if you receive certain dialogue options based on which companion you chose to accompany you through your Skyrim playthrough. That's going to be completely different from another player's playthrough. So these kinds of decisions that give your players something to tell each other. Or like Pokemon. Like, let's say I have a team of 6 Pokemon that I'm playing through the game with, and my friend's playing through the same game, and he has his team of 6 Pokemon. And when I'm fighting the champion, one of my Pokemon has a move that came in really clutch. My Garchomp used Earthquake, and it wiped like half the champion's team. And I tell my friend about it, and my friend's like, oh, cool, well, this is what happened in my fight with the champion. It was way harder because this was my team. And then maybe your friend plays through the game again and they use a Garchomp this time because they want to see how strong Garchomp really is. Just these kinds of stories that your players are telling each other that are exacerbated by you having replay value. And that add replay value to the game in and of themselves. If your players are talking to each other about unique things that happened in their playthrough that they're sure didn't happen to other people, then they're enjoying the replay value of your game, and they're creating replay value by telling other people about things that could happen when they play the game. So those are just a few tips about replay value. I want to thank you guys for watching. This is an experimental series. This is going up on StevensvilleGamers tonight, and I'm excited for everybody to watch it. But yeah, if you're interested in game design, what should I cover in my next game design talk? Let me know in the YouTube comments below when this goes up, and I'm excited to deliver another episode if this does well. I'm really passionate about game design. I really enjoy it, and I love talking about it. So I hope that I can bring you guys some more content. But in the meantime, thank you for watching. I hope you take care. Stay safe. This is War Crimes Uwu signing off. Good night.